Evaluation Network know that there are blogs and other activities on the site. Today, my partner in Blue Marble Evaluation, Glenn Page, and I will both be presenting. We'll begin with a little bit of update about what we're seeing happen. Now I'm going to discuss the relationship between facilitation and Blue Marble Evaluation. You can enter your questions or comments in the chat at any point, and Charmaine will help us monitor those. And so I'm going to turn it over to Glenn to get us grounded in some of what's happening. And then I'll be back with you to talk about facilitation and evaluation. Glenn, good morning to you.
Well, good morning, Michael, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for spending some time with us regarding the focus on Blue Marble evaluation. This seems like an incredibly dystopian time around the world, and part of what Blue Marble evaluation does is provide us with principles, core ways of seeing. We know what it means to actually use a microscope to see the small. What Blue Marble helps us do is see the macroscope, to see the wide and the systems that we're part of. And one of the things, Michael and I have been talking about this, the moment that we're in and the emergence of remarkable amount of networks. So I'm just going to do a bit of a share screen and show a network, a list of just some of the networks that are emerging. So things like the Global Commons Alliance, an initiative of organizations coming together with really focusing on science-based thresholds, social entrepreneurs around what's called Catalyst 2030, the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, in and of themselves are intended to be transformational, but there's actually a group called the SDG Transformations Forum, led by Steve Waddell, working on, well, what does it mean to actually create the systems that are needed to transform in order for the SDGs to be attained. Things like the UN World Food Summit that Michael's been very much involved with the work with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, but also things like Seafood 2030, which is an initiative of basically philanthropies, business enterprises within the seafood sector, as well as a great deal of interested folks who have livelihoods linked to seafood, trying to understand, well, what does that mean? What does the next decade mean for us? Humanity Rising, bringing a lot of different ideas, people, concepts, networks together, really remarkable work. Then there's, of course, the Transformations Conference series that began back in 2013, and it's continuing. So keep an eye out for that. Things like the R3.0, led by Bill Bowie and Ralph Thurm. In fact, that'll be the focus of our next webinar, but they just had a, a wonderful transformations type conference event that was entirely online. Things like the International Geodesign Collaborative, which are urban and regional planners coming together and thinking about the kinds of change that we need at the urban-rural interface. Regenerative Communities Network, this comes out of the principles of regenerative economics and communities around the world sensing the need for a pathway for more regenerative ways of acting and being, and Bounce Beyond. I mean, one of the participants in this call, Edward Mueller in Costa Rica, is very active in this and basically acknowledging the pandemic and where we are now with all sorts of systemic realities that are coming into the fore, and really trying to think, okay, what is the opportunity here to not just return back to the status quo, but to bounce beyond. So these are things that we would call expressions of Blue Marble leadership. From the beginning, when Michael was conceptualizing that, and he and I had a lot of communication about the title of the book, and it certainly is rooted in evaluation and evaluative rigor and the facilitation that he'll describe it a bit further, but it's also rooted in design thinking. It's rooted in implementation thinking. It's rooted in bringing together people and other networks and institutions. as well as evaluation. So we see this really as a leadership challenge and a leadership opportunity in this moment. So Michael, what are some of the things that you're seeing in this moment as we look around the world, and forest fires, a very, very dystopian US election? What are some of the things you're seeing from your perspective?
Let me turn more directly to the evaluation community because of the active work that's going on there. Nikki's on the call. Eval Indigenous has become very active and includes a Blue Marble perspective. Eval Youth is very active around the world, and there are new networks and opportunities being created there. A new group of Eval group working on the SDGs and mobilizing around that. And a number of the evaluation virtual conferences. Yesterday, I was a part of opening the Australasian Evaluation Society conference with a Blue Marble perspective. The South African conference is coming up, and they've invited me to talk about Blue Marble, the Ohio Evaluation Association. And we've got AEA coming up in October. I'll be making a presentation there on Blue Marble evaluation. So there's a lot of interest in the evaluation community, as well as connecting to these broader networks. When we first started talking about Blue Marble evaluation, it emerged in some ways as a further add-on to regional projects and a few international projects. But what's emerged in the last few years is beyond projects and programs, really networks that are trying to influence the global arena, both in specialized areas like the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. Last week, I keynoted the international conferences on forests and agroecology. And they're reorganizing as a set of agricultural institutions on a more global level. So these are all places where we're seeing interest in both engaging internationally and globally and making evaluation part of that engagement.
So in this, Michael, in this work, in some ways, I actually see the field of evaluation seems to be in some ways moving to a new era. What may have been the last era, say from 2000 to say 2017, something around innovation, I actually see this could be the era of transformation. What are some of your thoughts on that? And I see you as just such a major thought leader in this space, bringing the era of transformation to the fore.
Well, that's part of, appreciate your emphasizing that, because what we're seeing more and more is that the level of changes that are needed, whether it's a social justice uprising, where we're talking about attacking systematic racism and structural racism, the movement among indigenous people for realization of their rights as articulated in the international rights of indigenous people, women and children's rights. These are all represent transformations. The thing about the word transformation is that it's actually neutral. So you can have transformations of the kind that we seek: global prosperity, no one left behind, reduced inequities, enhanced sustainability. But there are the shadow, from our value perspective, movements of totalitarianism, white supremacy, nationalism, that are in their own ways aiming at transformation. And so in a way, we are in a transformational battleground about which of these directions will prevail as the world unfolds.
Well, take it away, my friend. I just want to just note your commitment. I think you mentioned at one of the trainings I attended, you mentioned you've started your training in 1975. Is that right?
That was the first UFE workshop. That's right.
45 years, Michael, 45 years, and it is really remarkable. So I think I join all the others on this call and a global community just to recognize your enormous contribution to this and how you aren't just a seer, but you're a seer and a doer, both. You're seeing the realities in the world, but you're actually doing and contributing to the on-the-ground work. Just the IPDEP training you gave last week was an amazing example of the kind of people that you're connecting with. So some of your thoughts on that facilitation role that you've really given birth to.
Well, thank you for that that intro, Glenn. We've been partners in this for a while now, and Glenn's contribution to the book and to our ongoing thinking and work is fundamental. So the Blue Marble book came out officially this year. I finished it. It was published at launched at AEA in October of last year, and the Facilitating Evaluation book that I did came out also at the end of last year and bears a 2020 copyright. And I've never talked about the connection between those two books, which is part of what I want to talk about, including this was inspired in part by the teaching that I've been doing virtually. In August, I did a course on facilitation sponsored by Encompass. And last week, as Glenn mentioned, the International Program for Development Evaluation Training, IPDET, has reemerged after a year off as they transitioned from to Bern, Switzerland, and a new group of sponsors there. That training is 20 years old, and I've been a part of that from its beginning. It used to be in Ottawa annually, and now is operating out of Bern, but has gone virtual, and had a group of 20 folks internationally. We had them from around the world interested in Blue Marble evaluation, several from the UN system, people in universities, in NGOs, and it having these two courses back to back in August and September made me realize that I haven't really connected the two together officially in any of the webinars or work we did. So we thought we'd spend some time on that, and then Glenn will pick it up from there. Again, feel free to enter questions or comments in the chat as we go along. So the first edition of utilization-focused evaluation came out in 1978, which was more an analysis of the issues around use based upon the research that we had begun doing. Well, I was at the University of Minnesota running one of the first evaluation training programs in a degree sense there at that time. And from the beginning, it was clear that to work with stakeholders, work with what we've come to call the intended users, was going to require facilitation skills. And evaluation training was almost entirely methodological. It's only been in the last couple years and over the last decade through the work of Gene King with the American Evaluation Association Task Force on Competencies that we've made it official and clear that a part of our work involves interpersonal skills, including especially facilitation. But utilization-focused evaluation has always been heavily facilitation oriented, and the training that I've done in that over the years has included how to work with intended users, right from the beginning all the way through. That working with stakeholders is what gave rise to developmental evaluation. And this is a time of a major development in developmental evaluation. Those of you who are familiar with that book, which came out in 2011, although I began writing about it before then, identified 5 major purposes for developmental evaluation. Ongoing development of programs that were operating in complex dynamic systems and moving through changes as the society changed, but had as their purpose innovation and adaptation. And then taking principles of programs to scale was a second purpose. Helping generate new ideas for interventions that might move into a traditional evaluation track. systems change, which was the entree into Blue Marble evaluation, that we're not just doing projects and programs, but developmental evaluation involves changing systems. And finally, humanitarian aid, where there are natural and political disasters and people doing that kind of developmental work. But what's happened with COVID, as I've heard from people, worked with people, consult with my clients, is a new sixth kind of developmental evaluation that we hadn't anticipated or written about in the book, and I'm talking about here for the first time. And that is the developmental evaluation for programs that were in a traditional track. Were doing the logic model, had a theory of change, had SMART goals, had a traditional work plan and a traditional evaluation outcomes measurement plan. And now, because of COVID, and in some cases the social justice uprising, because of the economic crisis that's accompanying COVID, financial stresses on organizations and governments, that developmental evaluation is becoming a form of helping organizations pivot from traditional implementation and traditional evaluation into a developmental mode, an adaptation mode, so that mitigating and coping with crisis and unexpected turbulence becomes a major new purpose for developmental evaluation. It was out of the work in developmental evaluation that principles and the emphasis on principles emerged, which is the foundation then for both Blue Marble evaluation, but also for the facilitating evaluation. So those of you familiar with the Blue Marble evaluation book know that it presents 4 overarching principles: a global thinking principle, an anthropocene as context principle, a transformative engagement principle, and an integration principle. And then there are following 11 additional principles at an operating level. And what I've used in the facilitating evaluation book is the metaphor of the brittle star for the 5 principles around facilitating evaluation. And where I'm headed here is putting these 2 sets of principles together. So the brittle star is a sea creature that is different from a starfish, which moves by suction. A brittle star moves by moving its tentacles very quickly. It has 1 tentacle, sometimes 2 in front and 3 or 4 behind, and can move very quickly. But one of the characteristics of a brittle star is it can stop instantaneously and change direction by changing which tentacle is in front and moving in another direction. And because there were 5 principles for Blue Marble evaluation, I adopted that as my mascot in a way, or metaphor for what Blue Marble evaluation or facilitating evaluation represents, and identified 5 principles with utilization-focused evaluation principles at the core, but 5 facilitation principles for working with intended users. In a workshop on this that graphic artist Kat Ho participated in, she turned that into some graphic PowerPoints that identify the personal factor as a principle, engaging through options, number 2, going clockwise as a principle, embedding evaluation thinking throughout, leading from the facilitating to leading edge, and observing, interpreting, and adapting as a facilitation principle. So what I'm going to do is take these 5 evaluation facilitation principles and connect those to some Blue Marble evaluation principles as a way of emphasizing the interplay between the facilitation work that comes with doing Blue Marble evaluation, but having facilitation principles to guide that. I make the point in the facilitating evaluation book that there's now International Association of Facilitation. There are facilitators that are doing all kinds of work, including, of course, evaluation. And that evaluation facilitation, I make the case in the first chapter of the facilitation book, is a specialized version of more generic facilitation skills and techniques. So here is an overview of just a few of the connections between facilitating evaluation and blue marble evaluation. There's Kat, who did the graphic posters for this. And so I just noted the 4 overarching blue marble principles. The first of facilitation principle, being guided by the personal factor, is about the ways in which we've learned that evaluations are more likely to be used if people care about what's being evaluated, if they have a personal relationship to what's being evaluated, not in the abstract, not just as part of their job, but that they care. And that we identify in our research on utilization-focused evaluation the importance of the personal factor. And in the Black Swan book that Nassim Nicholas Taleb did, one of the most influential books of all time, and the pandemic, by some analyses, being a Black Swan major event, he came out with a book last year called Skin in the Game about making clear what anybody's interest is in any particular thing. As important, he's a financial advisor, a financial guru, and he said in particular for investing, if you have a financial investment advisor, don't ask for their advice, ask to see their portfolio. Do they have skin in the game? Are they doing the things they advise you to do? So we have a skin in the game principle in blue marble evaluation, which is about the fact that we all have a personal stake in the future of humanity. We all have a personal stake in a more sustainable world and a more equitable world for the well-being of humanity. And so facilitating with the personal factor connects with the skin in the game principle and blue marble evaluation as making our own connection to the issues of blue marble evaluation a part of engaging with others about their interests, rather than being supposedly neutral, independent, outside, external, value-free. The blue marble evaluation is very much committed to sustainability and equity and brings those values to bear. So we have skin in the game. The second facilitation principle is engaging through options. And so part of what we do with blue marble evaluation facilitation is work with folks around, as Glenn mentioned in his opening comments, how to look big picture, to zoom out, what trends are going on there, how to respond to those trends, and zoom in for the local context, what's called the global principle, combining local and global. We work with folks to make that connection and to see the options and patterns that allow that to go on. We work to look at the options among what you do long-term, medium-term, and short-term. And so facilitation often involves helping people consider different perspectives, different options, and the implications of those and the relationships between them. The third facilitation principle is observe, interpret, and adapt. So as facilitators, it's important not to just make a plan for how the facilitation is going to go and what exercises and interactions are going to happen and just follow through that plan regardless. We have to be paying attention to how people are reacting, what they're picking up on, how they're responding, what issues emerge. Developmental evaluation and complexity tell us that things will emerge. And one of the things that has emerged is a reframing of things. So that for years, I'm based in Minnesota. Charmaine is based in Minnesota, the land of 10,000 lakes. It's where the last glacier melted. And the major occupation, hobby of people for leisure is fishing. 80+% of the Minnesota population goes fishing at least once a year. And I used to open workshops in Minnesota, not by talking about evaluation, but by talking about fishing. How's the fishing going? Because every issue in evaluation is, in fact, in fishing. What constitutes a good day fishing? What are you fishing for? What are the outcomes? Size of fish, number of fish, who you're fishing with? Are you fishing for eating? Are you doing catch and release? Are you fishing with kids? There are competitions for fishing. There's ice fishing. Minnesotans fish all winter, the hardcore. But now, instead of talking about how's the fishing going, as the world has changed, as blue marble has emerged, I talk about what are people seeing about the sustainability of the fishing ecosystem. The prized fish in Minnesota, the walleye, is very temperature sensitive, and warming of the lakes will threaten the walleye population. We're seeing lakeside erosion and pollution of lakes. And so moving the discussion to the sustainability of the fishing ecosystem is a pivot in evaluation facilitation from the act of fishing to the context for fishing. The fourth principle in facilitation for evaluation is embedding evaluative thinking throughout, that everything we do is helping people learn how to think evaluatively, from situation analysis to formulating questions, to choosing methods, to interpreting data, to following through with actions. And that's especially important in relationship to the blue marble global thinking principle. Global problems like climate change, worldwide pollution, and global disparities require global interventions and correspondingly globally oriented world savvy evaluators. So the very first principle of blue marble thinking is to apply whole earth big picture thinking to all aspects of systems change. And so what that means is an evaluation facilitator, as we bring things like facilitation, sustainability and equity to the utilization focused evaluation process, or whatever facilitation process one is using, helping people not only think evaluatively, but thinking globally becomes important. Last week I keynoted the conference on forests and agroecology. And agroecology is principles based and describes itself as a science, a movement, and a practice. And principles inform and gird all three aspects of agroecology. And so it's facilitating now connecting blue marble principles with agroecological principles as a form of embedding evaluative and global thinking. Epidemiology is another field where there's, as much as there's a knowledge base there, there's also a way of thinking about things that we're all having to learn, that the general public and the worldwide public is having to learn about how and why things happen as they happen. Epidemiologists must persuade people to upend their lives, to forgo travel and socializing, to submit themselves to blood draws and immunization shots, even when there's scant evidence that they're directly at risk. Epidemiologists also must learn how to maintain their persuasiveness, even as their advice shifts. The recommendations that public health professionals make at the beginning of an emergency. There's no need to wear masks. Children can't become seriously ill. Often change as hypotheses are disproved. New experiments occur and the virus mutates. And so we have this engagement between the things that we know, our knowledge base, the things that we don't know, that we're inquiring into, that we're evaluating, that we're studying and trying to figure out. The American statistician last year came out with an article of moving beyond the world of point P equal 0.05. They recommended doing away with the term statistically significant, never using it, banning it from journals, from research reports, from evaluation, and replacing it with principles, because they said the statistical significance had become mechanistic. People are just looking for the p-value and not thinking about what it means. So the principles that they put forth are to accept uncertainty, be thoughtful, be open, and be modest. And they describe this change like a movement. In that volume, they say the initial slow speed of progress should not be discouraging. That is how all broad-based social movements move forward, and we should be playing the long game. But the ball is rolling downhill. The current generation is inspired and impatient to carry this forward. So let's do it. Now, remember, these statisticians talking. So let's do it. Let's move beyond statistically significant, even if upheaval and disruption are inevitable for the time being. It's worth it. In a world beyond P less than 0.05, by breaking free from the bonds of statistical significance, statistics in science and policy will become more significant than ever. Transformation language, Glenn. As Carl Sagan said, science is a way of thinking, much more than a body of knowledge. And so evaluative thinking has become important in the field and is the bedrock with global thinking and blue marble evaluation of the integration between global facilitation and evaluation facilitation. And finally, the fifth principle in the facilitating evaluation is facilitating to the leading edge, helping people keep up to date with what's going on, what the trends are, what the indicators are, what the new ideas are. And in that regard, I relate this to the principle of being aware of and engaging from the perspective of the implications of the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is context principle is to know and face the realities of the Anthropocene and act accordingly. People are just becoming gradually aware. It's not widespread recognized yet that we have moved into this era called the Anthropocene, in which human actions are having more effect on the earth processes than natural processes. And so to review with people the implications of what it means to have moved into this new era and the implications for design of programs, for implementation, for evaluation is a part of facilitating, helping people generate their responses and understandings of new actions. These are covers from the journal, the magazine Anthropocene. And so part of what I do in facilitating is simply show these images to get people grounded in the language and the term, show them where and how widespread this language is emerging, and then have folks talk about their responses and reactions to, we dig into what it means. There's a controversy about the term Anthropocene, both about when it began. Folks will be deciding that in the geologists and those who make such decisions, but also about what to call it. Because of the global inequities, one of the objections to the term Anthropocene is it makes it sound like all humans are responsible for the degradation of the earth and for climate, the enhancing climate change. But more than 80% of that is the global north, is industrialized countries. And so there are folks wanting to call it the capitalocene or the wealth using the earth scene. But it looks like Anthropocene is probably going to be the term that most emerges. An article from Ecology and Society about the concept of the Anthropocene as a game changer. And discussing, as we did last week at the IPDET course, on why the Anthropocene matters for evaluation. So in the context of the coronavirus, of the social justice uprising, of climate emergency, of the California fires and Australian fires, of the economic challenges that are likely to come and are coming from economic recession, possibly depression, connecting these trends together is a way to do evaluative thinking and blue marble thinking and facilitating people seeing these interconnections. Let me close with a quote from Vladimir Lenin, who said, "There are decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen." And our weeks in the last 4 months have felt like weeks where decades happen. A lot going on. Our work as evaluators involves both facilitating evaluative thinking and facilitating global thinking if you're doing blue marble evaluation. Facilitation is increasingly important with governance. It's increasingly important with facilitating theories of change, with networks. Glenn opened with the different networks that there. Networks depend heavily upon facilitation. And so as we connect our global networks together through the theory of transformation of blue marble evaluation, we're integrating facilitation evaluation and global thinking blue marble evaluation. Charmaine, are there questions in chat?
I had a couple of questions. One is sort of going back to the beginning around these networks and how do we, Dan asked, how do we ensure that Balance Beyond initiatives don't get co-opted by neoliberal center left platforms that cloak their intentions? If you want to talk some about how we're kind of paying attention to who is involved in these initiatives and what Blue Marble evaluation can bring to bear in that respect.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And part of facilitation is surfacing values. The personal factor is getting out who's involved with what values, with what perspectives, with what diversity, being inclusive, um, being equitable, and bringing those values forward. So I very much take it as a facilitation challenge and work to be sure that the various and diverse values are surfaced and talked about so that people in networks can be aware of where they're moving, what values inform those movements. That's part of the facilitation responsibility.
And sort of in a similar vein, Stephen asks how you apply these principles when there are people who accept changing evidence and adopt or follow conspiracy theories. So how are these principles applied? And also, how are these principles applied when there are entire cultures that have their own logical systems that are quite different from Western scientific approaches?
Great question. So again, in the facilitation role, our work is more in a Socratic mode than in an advocacy mode. What we're advocating for is thoughtfulness, is diverse perspectives being heard and integrated, including diverse perspectives addressing sustainability and equity. But in the role of facilitation then, what we're doing is helping these different perspectives engage each other in a respectful manner. And one of the things that we typically do in facilitating groups is establish some norms at the beginning. So norms about how conflicts will be handled, norms about what kind of evidence will be viewed as appropriate for discussion, norms about how people will interact. And one of the things that I often do in facilitation, I did in the facilitation course, is I show a video of a Dr. Seuss book called Zaks, Z-A-K-S, about a north-going Zaks and a south-going Zaks that meet, and both of them have been trained and schooled never to budge. So they meet in the prairie of Prax, and they refuse to budge. Neither one will move at all. And I give people permission, we actually practice that anytime we run into such diametric opposed positions that people have lost the conversational exchange of interest and evidence, that anybody can call out Zaks. Or I'll, as a facilitator, say we're at a Zaks moment. We got people who can't move past each other and can't hear each other. So part of facilitation is to engage these different perspectives in a respectful way so that folks can be heard. I'm going to stop here and turn it over to Glenn to share some of his recent work in similar regards and connect off of this and riff off of this. And we'll come back at the end and close it out. Glenn?
Michael, thank you. Wow, incredible. Tour de force yet again. And I'm going to give a challenge to folks. Remember the first time that Michael really changed your thinking, whether it was a conference, plenary, whether it was a workshop. For me, it was in 2011. This was at the AEA, American Evaluation Association conference. This was in Anaheim. And he was actually giving his first AEA workshop on developmental evaluation. It simply changed my life. And I just can't say it with any more profound language, because what he did was he basically, I come to this as a restoration ecologist. I just spent a lot of time in the marine coastal ocean system, thus loving the use of brittle star and other fisheries references. But he really gave to me an understanding of the systems ecology work that I was so rooted in, and how we understand and make sense of a complex dynamic world. So Michael, just to say thank you for all of that you've done. And yeah, I'll just take you through a little bit, applying the Blue Marble evaluation principles to some of the recent work that's going on with the Blue Marble network. So folks are aware of what's happening, and we're using the principle of overarching integration. So we'll have a couple of principles here, and really what this says, as Michael mentioned, it's integrating the Blue Marble principles in the design, engagement, and evaluation of large-scale systems change. Well, a key question for this, and as Michael showed you with a microscope, macroscope, how do we see the systems that we're within? We're actually quite good at seeing the small. We're not very good at seeing the large. So just at the beginning of this year in 2020, a series of networks came together. So the Blue Marble Evaluation Network, the Geodesign Collaboration, the SDG Transformations Forum, and Regenerative Communities Network to ask the question, can we form a meta working group focused on this idea of systems mapping and analysis, transformation systems mapping? And the answer was a resounding yes. And we launched this in April 22nd. It was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And since then, we now have over 140 active members through almost 30 countries. And it's beginning to be a good distribution of North and South participants. It's not just the North folks involved. It really has a very much of a global South orientation as well. And it's really coming together with some of the best systems thinkers, systems seers in the world. We're actually still in the gathering and forming stages. So if anyone who's on this webinar is interested, let us know. There's information on the Blue Marble Evaluation website. And we have 10 different work streams as well as an integration work stream. And we're guided by the principles of Blue Marble Evaluation, as well as principles of what it means to work together in high quality collaboration. And I'm going to tell you just a very brief story about one of the place-based initiatives. And the interest for this is really, really growing. So I'll just give you an example of some of the work streams. One is mapping the mappers across the globe, convened by Scott David and supported as a fellow by Juliana Borges, who's the founder of Systems Lab in Bogota, Colombia. Also, Catherine McGowan, who's at Mount Royal University, she's leading and convening an effort on this concept of what is a transformation system and how do we then begin to think about mapping it, supported by Sam Maddy, who's the fellow for her, working with me here in Portland, Maine. There's a work stream on transformation systems mapping toolkit led by Kirk Bergstrom and Gurpreet Singh of the Skoll Foundation and supported as a fellow by Dylan O'Neill, a student at University of Colorado Boulder working on his master's degree. An incredibly remarkable bit of work of South-South thinking. Melina Angel, who's a biomimicry expert in Bogota, working closely with Tsitsi Luis Morads, who's working in Harare, Zimbabwe, and really trying to understand the African and Latin conceptualization of what does systems change really mean. So much of their work is rooted in international development when funding and design and theories of change come from the North. This is about how to better see the systems of change from a South-South perspective. Another one working on the unifying framework for integrating and mapping the integration of SDGs, led by Jim Ritchie Dunham for the Institute of Strategic Clarity, and Adam Henowitz, a postdoc at University of Sheffield. And finally, one called Mapping the Transformative Capacities for Navigating Crisis, led by my partner in all of this, Per Olsen, as well as one of his graduate students, Stephen Meja, at the Stockholm Resilience Center. But what's important is that it's not enough just to have these work streams. We need to actually learn from each other. And so we have created an integration work stream led by Suzanne Bowles of Cattail Strategy and supported as a fellow by Katarina Braun in the Netherlands. So this is really important because really what this is, we have now 12 work streams, one place-based. It's all about learning by doing. And one of the things we're actually doing is establishing a course for how to create a Blue Marble baseline for your bioregion. This is rooted in that Facilitating Evaluation Principles book that Michael showed that is really just spectacular. And this is just launching. So we'll have 4 modules in September, October, then 3 modules in November and 5 in January, February. with 5 bioregions, 2 bioregions in the highlands of Scotland, and 2 in the Gulf of Maine. And then we'll be actually summing this up at the UN Council of Parties, which is actually held in Glasgow in November of 2021. So a key focus of this work are looking at the coastal realities that we're facing, not just long-term sea level rise, but also the issues of fisheries depletion, warming trends, issues of inequity, issues of in-migration, out-migration, issues of education, and areas, as I mentioned, Scotland, England. There's a remarkable bit of work being done by Isabel Carlisle and South Devon, working on a bioregional focus, work led by a group called Yenampuano in the western region of Ghana, work led by folks like Edward Mueller in Costa Rica with regenerating, looking at the entire country, regenerating the roadmap for Costa Rica, and again here in the Gulf of Maine. So these are some of the areas that we're working with in this bit, and it really speaks to the Blue Marble principle of, as Michael called it, glocal, or acting globally. So all of this must be contextually sensitive. This is not a one-size-fits-all. This is truly an understanding of the contextual realities in the places that we're working, that's grounded in the interactions between the local and global scales of change. So in the Gulf of Maine, one of the reasons why we're working here, it's one of the most rapidly warming systems on the planet. We have 11 million people here, and in some areas like Boston, it's very urbanized, but some areas in here, it's also incredibly rural, and still tribal communities, indigenous communities are still actively working on visions of transformation. And so working collectively with folks in these areas is extremely important. So these are the 3 bioregions we're working with, and they forms the basis of these actions. We're also working on a transformations transect that goes all the way from Cape Sable to the tip of Cape Cod to better see the systems we're within. Could be the first transformations transect on the planet, but I guarantee you it won't be the last. The headquarters is right here in Portland at the New England Ocean Cluster, and we have some physical locations, but it's a novel initiative. We don't know of anyone else doing this, but we want to share this broadly. And so if there's, again, any interest in this, check out the website. This is a little bit of a understanding of this area from the coastal communities in this region, and this shows you the more densely populated and more rural populated areas. And this is that transect I mentioned, which is really just an existing road network that goes all the way from Cape Sable to the tip of Cape Cod. But it's the imagination is that we actually create the global, or create the macro scope to learn and better see the systems that each of these areas are facing from a global, regional, local perspective. And we'll be working, as I said, from the headquarters here in the New England Ocean Cluster in Portland, Maine. And we also have learning centers, such as the Blue Marble Learning Center in Cobscook Bay. So with that, it's really important, as Michael said, the seeing across scales and what it means to see the issues and the human responses, visualizations, models, stories, case studies, but also weaving together this net weaving idea, the mapping, social network analysis, GIS, and learning how to act together. Radical learning about the transformation system, the diagnostic power, what's being learned, where are the synergies, what's missing, what are the forces holding back significant change. We often use the term green shoots of change. Where are those green shoots or the blue shoots of change? And accelerating, where are those synergies? How do we scale within the system? We also focus on this cross-silo principle that we're looking, yes, at ecosystem health, but also economic issues and indicators, institutions and governance, and issues relating to well-being. So it really does ask a lot of the practitioners in this process, but it's something that the world is really needed at this time of pandemic. and looking at things, what's beginning to emerge: food systems, education systems, restoration, ecosystem-based fisheries management, food sovereignty from the ideas of the creation and creativity of indigenous communities, communication systems, finance, tourism, integrated public health, wellness. These are the kinds of transformation systems we're trying to learn how to see together in this macroscope. So in closing out, it's really about this idea of this brittle star, as Michael mentioned, the 5 operating principles, being guided by the personal factor, engaging through options, understanding what are those options and how to actually move forward, observing, interpreting, and adapting, seeing windows of opportunity that may open, that may be closing, leverage points, etc. Embed the evaluative thinking throughout the process, absolutely critical. And finally, as Michael mentioned, invigorating with leading edge inputs. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Charmaine, if there's any other questions.
Thanks, Glenn. Some chatter, but not specific questions, although there was one participant who wanted to hear a little bit more about the idea of transformation transects. If you want to go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, excellent. Well, the transect is it's sort of a common engineering concept. It's often a linear line, and it's used to basically create a series of stations that we can reference. And it's often used in things like a road alignment or some sort of, if say you're restoring a dune. I spent years doing large-scale restoration, and we would always have a transect to measure the restoration of a particular coastal dune system. So what we were doing with this is basically taking that same idea, but really reimagining what a transformations transect could be. And this was, again, instead of a linear line across the Gulf of Maine, we figured, well, let's use the road network and let's actually think about how do we crowdsource information? How do we engage people in the process of sharing information? This really gets to the idea of the world game concept that was brought forth by Buckminster Fuller. And how do we actually reimagine that? In fact, we're creating an effort called Imagine.World that actually brings in big data, artificial intelligence, in order to create that system to allow people to access and understand where are the systems that we're part of. So that's an example of how we're trying to reimagine the concept of transect and applying it to a much wider scale. We're working with, I just got off a wonderful call with the folks from Scotland who are doing remarkable design thinking around what it means to live and work within a bioregion. And they're doing some really great work around citizen sensing. And they're seeing the possibility of a transformations transect in Scotland that connects the Tayside and the Clyde bioregions that we're working with. And again, something that we can show at COP26 in November of next year.
Thanks, Glenn. No other questions, but I welcome anyone to, if there's one more question in the chat, or Michael, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I would just add that the Facilitating Evaluation book and Blue Marble Evaluation book were written when we could still travel, when we could do a facilitation face-to-face. So the major new development in facilitation that actually I think is quite positive for the global community, for global networks, is the new technology possibilities with virtual facilitation, connecting people less expensively together around the world. I don't expect us to go back to the old normal of having meetings face-to-face as much as we used to, even conferences as much face-to-face as we used to. And so facilitating to the leading edge, one of the fifth of the facilitation principles means facilitating virtually. I spent a good bit of time in preparation for the IPDET training last week with their support staff, helping us access some new platforms for facilitation, ways of engaging people. There's all kinds of new opportunities that are emerging for facilitating groups virtually. Zoom is not the only way to go on this, and so a part of the forthcoming challenge is to be able to adapt our facilitation to the virtual world, and expect that some version of that is going to continue. Glenn, if you have any final comment, and then I'll wrap it up.
Well, just to say, it's really wonderful. I see a lot of wonderful familiar faces and names on the webinar, and I would just say stay tuned to this series and help provide ideas, innovations. And we've got some really wonderful ideas and leadership. With Nicole Bauman, who's on the call, is really coming in and contributing significantly to bringing in the indigenous wisdom in the process. But in terms of two folks I'd like to mention, or two upcoming webinars, the next one is on October 20th with Ralph Thurm and Bill Bowie talking about reporting 3.0. We have a really special guest on November 23rd, a group called Tostan, and Elena Bonametti, who I believe is also on this call as well. She'll be presenting, and the work of Tostan is absolutely remarkable. So if you can note on, thank you, Charmaine, for putting the Tostan webinar in the chat box. If there's, oh, good. Elena is on the call. Wonderful. And yeah, check out the website that Elena cites there, because the work there is absolutely transformative, and be really wonderful to hear from Elena in November. So with that, Michael, take us home.
Well, thank you all for joining us virtually. It's an opportunity for us to connect with you, to connect with each other. Knowing that these webinars are happening monthly helps focus my attention on thinking about what's emerging. And I want to especially express appreciation for the participants in the Facilitating Evaluation course in August, and IPDET Blue Marble Evaluation course last week. Some of them are on the call, for helping move my thinking forward about the connections between facilitation and global interests, and the new challenges of using virtual technology. We're all in this together. There are a number of resources around virtual facilitation getting put in the chat, and we'll be back next month with another Blue Marble Evaluation webinar, and at the end of this month, the Blue Marble Evaluation book club. So thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Charmaine, for managing things for us, and thank all of you for participating. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you may be. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.